2 years after he retired, David opened a letter and immediately felt that something wasn't quite right. At first, it wasn't obvious. Nothing dramatic. Just numbers that didn't line up with what he had expected. His Medicare premiums had gone up not a little, but enough to make him stop and read the letter again. Then he noticed something else. A larger portion of his Social Security income was now being taxed, much more than he had planned for. It was getting dangerously close to that 85% threshold he had always assumed he would avoid. And slowly, a quiet realization started to settle in. The retirement he had spent years preparing for didn't feel as comfortable as it should have. But the strange part wasn't the numbers themselves, it was the timing of it all. Because nothing had gone wrong that year. There was no market crash, no bad investment, no sudden emergency. The real mistake didn't happen when that letter showed up. It happened 2 years earlier. On a single day, David chose without thinking twice. David didn't pick his retirement date because of taxes. He picked it because it felt right. There was something about December that made the decision feel complete. The end of a calendar year, the natural closing of a long chapter. After decades of working as an engineer, early mornings, constant deadlines, problems that always seemed to come back in new forms, he was tired. Not the kind of tired that disappears after a weekend. This was something deeper, a steady kind of burnout that had been building quietly over time. December gave him a sense of closure, a clean break, one life ending, another beginning. And if he was being honest, the timing worked in his favor financially too, or at least it seemed that way on the surface. His year-end bonus would hit. He could cash out the rest of his unused PTO. There was comfort in knowing he was walking away with everything he had earned, leaving nothing behind. If you had asked him back then, he would have said it was a practical decision. But underneath that logic, there was something more human. He didn't want to wait any longer. He didn't want to overthink it. He didn't want another year of meetings, another round of deadlines, another stretch of pretending he still had the energy for it. He just wanted out. So he chose a date, signed the paperwork, said his goodbyes, walked out for the last time. And for a while, it felt like he had made the perfect decision, like he had timed it just right. But what David didn't realize, what almost no one realizes in that moment, was that the system hadn't finished with him yet. By the time David walked out in December, he had already earned a full year of income. His salary, his bonus, the payout from unused vacation time. On paper, it looked like a strong finish, a full successful final year, exactly the kind of exit most people hope for. But something subtle started to happen almost immediately after he retired. His income didn't actually stop. It just changed form. Within weeks, money started coming in from different places. He began drawing from his 401k. A small pension payment kicked in. And like many people stepping into retirement, he started thinking about turning on his Social Security benefits to replace the paycheck he had just given up. From his point of view, this made perfect sense. He wasn't working anymore. He wasn't earning a salary. He was just transitioning into retirement. But the tax system doesn't recognize transitions. It doesn't care whether the income comes from a job or a retirement account. It only sees the total. And in that single tax year, David had unknowingly created something most people never intend to create: stacked income. A full year of earnings from his job layered on top of withdrawals and benefits that had already started. All of it combined, all of it counted together. That pushed him into a higher tax bracket. It made more of his Social Security taxable, creeping closer to that 85% level, and even the way his investments were taxed became less favorable. If that had been the only consequence, it might have been manageable. Unpleasant, but manageable. But it wasn't. Because the most expensive part of this decision didn't show up on his tax return at all. What caught David off guard wasn't something he saw right away. It showed up later, about 2 years later to be exact. That's when his Medicare premiums were recalculated, not based on what he was earning now, but based on what he had earned back then in that final year when everything had stacked together. This is where the system reveals something most people never see coming. There's a delay built into it. The income you create today doesn't just affect your taxes now, it carries forward, quietly. And then, when you're no longer expecting it, it comes back in a different form. For David, that meant higher premiums, what's known as IRMAA, a surcharge that doesn't ask whether you're still earning that money. It doesn't adjust based on how your life has changed. It simply looks at the number and assumes you can afford to pay more. That's the moment this stops feeling like a one-time issue and starts looking more like a chain reaction. I've watched this play out more times than I can count. People step into retirement thinking the hard part is behind them. They breathe a little easier. They feel like they've finally made it. And then, a year or two later, something shows up that they didn't plan for. If this is giving you a different way to think about retirement, take a second to like the video or subscribe. Not because you need more information, but because these are the kinds of details that are easy to miss until they're already affecting you. And the truth is, David still hadn't seen the full picture yet. What made the situation worse wasn't just what David ended up paying, it was what he never had the chance to do. Because by working almost the entire year, his income had already filled up the lower tax brackets before he ever officially retired. That meant, when the time came to make strategic decisions, real planning decisions, there was no room left to work with. No space to shift money from his pre-tax accounts into a Roth at a lower rate. No opportunity to withdraw from his IRA while staying within the 12% or even 22% bracket. Those windows didn't slam shut in a dramatic way. They closed quietly, in the background. As his income climbed higher and higher throughout the year, those opportunities simply disappeared. And by the time December ended, they were gone completely. This is the part most people never notice. They focus on how much they earned, how much they saved, how well they invested. But retirement isn't just about building wealth, it's about how you release it. David didn't just trigger higher taxes that year, he gave up control over how those taxes could have been managed in the first place. And by the time he realized that, there was nothing left to adjust. The pressure didn't stop with taxes, it showed up somewhere much more immediate. Health coverage. When David retired in December, his employer-sponsored insurance didn't gradually wind down. It ended quickly, and suddenly, right in the middle of the busiest time of the year, he was forced to make decisions that usually require careful planning. Should he move directly into Medicare? Was he even timing it correctly? Did he need to bridge the gap using ACA coverage, or rely on COBRA for a while? Each of those options came with deadlines, forms, rules, consequences, and if he got any of it wrong, the cost wouldn't just be financial, it could affect his coverage entirely. This is where timing stops being just a financial strategy and becomes something else. Logistical, stressful, easy to misjudge. Because when all of those decisions are compressed into the final weeks of the year, you're no longer thinking clearly about long-term outcomes. You're reacting. If you're within 5 to 10 years of retirement, drop the word timing below. Because what comes next is where most people start to realize this wasn't just about one decision. And then came the decision that felt the most natural and the most permanent. David had reached the point where he could start collecting Social Security. At 62, the option is there. The system allows it. And after stepping away from work, the idea of replacing that lost paycheck right away feels almost automatic. So he seriously considered taking it immediately. On the surface, it seemed logical. Income stops, benefits begin. A smooth transition. But the system doesn't reward that kind of urgency. It prices it. Because claiming early can permanently reduce your monthly benefit by 25% to 30%. Not temporarily, not for a few years, for the rest of your life. David wasn't being careless. He was trying to create stability, to make sure money was still coming in. But that's the part most people don't fully see in the moment. The comfort you gain now quietly reshapes what you receive later. And by the time that realization fully sets in, you're no longer making a decision. You're living with the outcome. There's another version of David's retirement that never actually happened. Same career, same savings, same exhaustion after years of working. Only one thing is different: the timing. In that version, David doesn't wait until December. He retires earlier in the year, somewhere between January and March, and suddenly everything looks different. His income for that year is much lower. That gives him room to move. Room to shift money from his IRA into a Roth without pushing himself into a higher bracket. Room to manage his withdrawals more strategically. Room to keep more of his Social Security income from being taxed instead of drifting toward that 85% threshold. He's no longer reacting, he's shaping the outcome. Or imagine another version. He retires mid-year around June or July. It's not perfect, but it creates balance. He still earns part of his salary, still collects some benefits from work, but he avoids stacking everything into a single tax year. And he has time to transition into Medicare without pressure. Then there's the version where timing aligns with age. Waiting until 65 to retire lines up naturally with Medicare. Waiting beyond 62 protects him from that 25% to 30% reduction in Social Security. Even reaching 59.5 opens up access to retirement accounts without penalties, and 73 determines when required distributions begin. None of these versions require more money. They just require a different moment to stop. The strange thing about David's story is that nothing about it looked like a mistake at the time. He didn't lose money in the market. He didn't take unnecessary risks. He didn't ignore advice. He simply chose a date that felt right and moved on. But retirement doesn't actually begin the day you stop working. It begins the moment the system starts responding to everything you've already set in motion: taxes, healthcare, benefits, each one tied not just to what you have, but when you choose to act. That letter David opened 2 years later wasn't random. It was a delayed reaction. So if you're thinking about retirement, don't just ask when you want to leave. Ask when the math actually works. And if you already have a date in mind, take a moment and ask yourself what happens after it.